Thank you so much for being with us. We've just been talking about D-Day. What have you been reflecting on today?
Oh, well, I think when today comes around, it's always the veterans themselves and what it must have felt like. Um, and it just kind of, when you see them, it just kind of blows your mind, the scale of the sacrifice, the endeavor, and what they did. And that they literally like just gave their today for our tomorrow. I mean, they knew they were doing that and they gave their today for our tomorrow. And when I see them, and I've been in Plymouth with D-Day veterans today, just an enormous sense of gratitude and real kind of, it's funny because for my generation, people who served and fought in, remote wars that were very different, we sort of tried to emulate their sense of duty and their sacrifice, and obviously never really came close, but they were such an inspiration for us. So to spend time with them is a real privilege.
Yeah, I can completely imagine that. Actually, it must be particularly poignant, if you're someone who has served in the armed forces as well. We're talking about the sacrifices that people made to help keep the UK, I guess, relatively safe for half a century almost. It has felt quite safe, as a civilian at times. But of course, what some of the leaders were talking about were that we are in a quite a dangerous place at the minute, a kind of perilous place at the minute on the world stage. Do you think, I guess, we need to be slightly kind of shaken out of our complacency?
Oh, I think we can become dangerously complacent. And, this is what has kind of really driven my work on veterans, because certainly for a generation of some of us, these wars aren't actually remote, for military families and service families up and down the country during those Afghanistan years. You were expecting your door to be knocked out or the phone to go, and that to be your life completely changed, to you lose your mum or your dad or your only son or daughter. And I think that kind of complacency that it's almost the kind of amnesia that the nation sometimes wants to sink into about what's required to defend the extraordinary privileges and freedoms that we have. And, some of us work really hard. I think we feel very lucky to come home from these conflicts, and we feel this duty to make sure that people really understand and truly understand what it feels like to be a veteran in the United Kingdom today.
Of course, one of the key Conservative policies in this election campaign is the introduction of national service. And I know that you've spoken about how you think it would be, good to instill that sense of duty in people in the United Kingdom. I was just talking to Jackie Smith, who's on our panel tonight, who said that she spoke to you at a podcast event just before the election was called, where an audience member asked you about the idea of national service. And you said that you didn't think it would actually help the army because the army is in a different place right now, and so it's not something that the army actually needs. Is that your view?
So look, I mean, we were conflating there two different issues. So I was very clearly asked about national service in the 50s and 60s, and should we bring back that national service? And what's being talked about now is a kind of voluntary service with a pathway through for a very small number of people who want to do it. So there's no compulsion to it. And I think those two things are very different. And I think that difference is good. I still don't think, national service 50s or 60s style is particularly something we want to see, but anything that kind of really binds communities together and gives young people that sense of purpose and that sense of mission that I certainly felt, with a possibility to go into the military if you want to, right? So there's no compulsion to it, I think, is great. And I think, particularly in communities like mine, I think that it really matters, and it increases opportunities for young people.
I can see, the argument that you're making that it would help the young people, but would it help the army itself? I mean, they've got to work out what to do with all these people, haven't they? How to train them, what kind of role to find, particularly if they're only going to be in it for a short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, well, when the announcement came out, I think people like myself and Ben Wallace and others worked hard to try and understand where the money was coming from, because I think there is a real pressure in the military at the moment around the number of asks they are required to do, and people like me will always ask for more money for the military. So this is backed up by new money that can go into, I go visiting my cadets down here and things like that, and I would love them to have more resource and more opportunity and things like that. And this is backed by new money. So in that respect, I was pleased to see it. I think it should be given a fair wind. Is it perfect? Of course it's not, but it's an election, right? And at least it's a bold promise that defines between two parties that are often accused of basically being the same thing.
Another thing you've been pushing for is this idea of veterans' ID cards being allowed to be used as ID at an election, and I think that's now going to happen. Can I just ask, though, why is it that veterans are allowed to use their ID to vote but students aren't? Is it because veterans are more likely to vote Conservative than students?
No, of course it's not. I think I've always been up against this argument. Why should veterans have dedicated mental health care pathways? Why should they have, why should they have the military covenant? I think being in the military is a definitively.
That's absolutely not. I'm talking about a very specific thing about why veterans' ID is able to be used as ID in polling stations and students isn't.
Yeah, because I can't comment on the students' part of it, but what we've had to do really a lot of work on is this digital verification in the veteran space to make sure that these cards can't be reproduced, to make sure that the digital records reflect a veteran service, and therefore we can use them. I don't think I've seen these stories about the idea that all veterans vote Conservative. They absolutely don't, and I've met many of them who who are not particularly happy. So I see the kind of media spin on it, but I mean, I'm not into that stuff. I think people know me by now. I'm not into that stuff. I'm interested in making sure that veterans are treated properly and that they can use their ID cards for all the things that we want them to.
Now, you're always a bit of a straight talker, so I'm quite interested to see how you'll respond to this question about, I guess, the direction of the Conservative Party. We're going to be talking to Andrew Street a bit later in the programme, who, for many people, see, is the kind of face of centrist conservatism, if you like. At the same time, it's very clear that Nigel Farage and Reform are rising in the polls more recently as well. Where do you think the Conservative Party should be? Should you be focusing on, the kind of right-wing flank with Nigel Farage, or worrying more about losing votes, I guess, in the blue wall to parties like the Liberal Democrats? What's your assessment?
Look, I think in all these things, there's no point looking at what everyone else is doing. You've got to think about what you believe in and why you get out of bed every morning to go and represent people in public service, and why you do what you do and what you believe in, right? And I'm a Conservative cabinet minister. I'm very proud of that. I believe in a modern, compassionate conservatism that we've seen under this Prime Minister. I think Reform, you cannot escape the truth that if you vote Reform, you will get a Labour government. So if those things that you believe in or claim to believe in that lead you to thinking about Reform, if you actually want to see them propagated in government policy rather than just being a protest vote, if you vote for Reform, you will get a Labour Member of Parliament here in Plymouth, and you will get a Labour government. And people really need to understand that. That's all I'd say about Reform. Their policy platform and everything is up to them. I think we have a good policy platform. I think you've seen some very good things announced. What we were talking today around veterans, we're talking about enshrining veterans' rights in this country for the first time in our history. That is a big moment, right? And there is a difference there between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. And that's the sort of thing we want to focus on. What do we actually believe in? Why do we do what we do? The legacy bill. Why do we not think it's right to prosecute veterans when they're 85 for something that's been investigated 6 times already, and treat them in the manner they were in Northern Ireland? Because we believe that it's not the right thing to do. It's about what you believe in. And I think you've got a difference there between the two parties, and we should focus on that.
We've talked a lot about some very important things in this interview, so you'll forgive me for asking you at the end about something that is a lot less important. But about a month ago, you were pictured with your shoes and socks off on a train. It sparked a bit of a kind of social media reaction, shall we say. So it's your chance to put your case for the defence. What was going on there?
So what had happened was, Sophie, I had taken my bike across Dartmoor to Exeter station because I like to do exercise because it helps me stop going crazy in this job. And unfortunately, the weather had changed up on the moor and I got absolutely drenched. So by the time I got to the bike, I was starting to get a bit sort of hypothermic by the time I got to the train. And I had to take my wet kit off and basically try and dry. Well, I couldn't dry it, but just try and get through the train journey. I honestly, I've been educated as to the social faux pas of taking off your shoes, and obviously I'm extremely sorry to everybody who was offended by my meat flippers. But I think worse crimes have been committed, and we should leave my tender meat flippers alone.
Okay, it's not where I thought this interview was going to go, talking about the tender meat flippers. But thank you very much.
We'll talk about them some more
today. Thank you.